Alright, we are back with a new video and continuing with this series of player rankings for Total Drama. We'll be doing a player ranking for Total Drama World Tour. Now, as with my previous videos like this is only covering their gains from this particular season, so I will not be including anything from Island or Action in this ranking. And again, we're just going to be ranking these players based on the games that they played in this season. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the list. So starting off the list at number 18, we had the player I think played the worst game. And here we have the first boot, actually, we have Ezekiel. And again, this is just talking about his time in the game. We're not talking about any of the stuff that happens after he's out of the game. But within the game, I mean, he was there. I mean, he didn't do that much actively wrong to be the first one voted out. He was just more so sort of an outlier in the cast. I mean, he didn't really have any connections, really. No one really wanted to keep him around. And even then, he did cost his team the first challenge. So that's a big knock at the end of the day. But again, compared to other like early boots, I mean, he doesn't do that much wrong in this particular season to be the first boot. It's just more so he doesn't really have any connections there, despite his willing to play. So because of that, I'm here at number 18. Now we're moving on to number 17, and we have a pretty weird player to talk about, as technically their placement is relatively high, but considering they were a late entry into the game, I mean, it's not too surprising their placement is high. But here we have Blaney. And Blaney's a weird player to talk about, as again, she does technically get 6/7th place, depending on whether you consider Courtney to be the first one out or not. However, again, she was only in the game for really 2 rounds, and really, I can't think of anything good that she did within the game. I mean, she just was just sort of there through her winning the contest and really doesn't really do much. She acts pretty entitled, doesn't really build any connections, and is promptly voted out shortly thereafter. The only reason I have her above Ezekiel is that she does technically survive our vote at the end of the day, but it's not really enough. I mean, Blaney is not really a fun character, and she doesn't really offer anything gameplay wise. So because of that, she's here at number 17. Now we're moving on to number 16, and the next two players we'll be talking about are pretty similar in that they were both manipulated by Alejandro. But at number 16, we have Bridgette. And Bridgette's game isn't really too much at the end of the day. I mean, she is on Team Victory, which does lose all the challenges, and she's a relatively early boot from Team Victory as well. And a lot of that is due to her getting manipulated by Alejandro, where Alejandro basically convinces her to fall in love with him. She falls head over heels over him, doesn't really think strategically beyond it. And obviously, he manipulates her into getting stuck to a pole, which costs the team the challenge, and she gets voted out as a result. Again, not too much to really talk about. And again, it's not great that she gets manipulated. However, again, this was still relatively early in the season where few people knew what Alejandro was really up to. So, again, I can't fault her too much, and I do have her a bit above these people who were barely in the game at all, but it's still not great. She's here at number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we have someone very similar. We have Lashana. And Lashana is interesting because, again, it's a very similar game to Bridgette, where she was manipulated by Alejandro early on, doesn't really see it coming, and then people just vote her out as a result. I guess the main reason I have her above Bridgette is because, well, one, she does survive another round over her, but I also feel like the circumstances of her elimination like aren't as bad to me. I mean, I guess they're both eliminated because they both lose the challenge for their teams, but whereas Bridgette is eliminated directly as a result of losing the challenge, Lashana, again, while losing the challenge, again, it's not too clear why. Like, she is actually voted out. I mean, I guess you could say people just weren't, I mean, have much of a reason to keep her around. Like, so it's not directly as a result of losing a challenge, but still a weird circumstance nonetheless. So I guess that's the main reason I have her above Bridgette, but I can't have her too much higher. So she's here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we have another Team Victory member and another person who was manipulated by Alejandro. Mind you, it was a different type of manipulation, and you could argue that this person should be lower on the list given the circumstances of their boot, but I decided to have him a bit higher, and here we have Harold. And Harold's weird because he was eliminated earlier than Bridgette and Lashana, and he was manipulated by Alejandro in arguably a worse way than Bridgette or Lashana, where at least with Bridgette and Lashana, I mean, that could have turned into a relationship and alliance with Alejandro, something that could have allowed them to be propelled later further into the game. It's just them losing challenges that caused him to be voted out. Whereas Harold was directly convinced to throw away his game by Alejandro in an effort to oppress Lashana. And that's not great. I mean, obviously, Harold should have known better than to just quit the game and should probably try to stay. However, the main reason I do have him above Harold, these last couple people, is that I feel like he probably would have made it a bit further in the game had he not quit the game. And I feel like he was a bit more active in his own fate in the game than the previous two people we just talked about. But at the end of the day, I mean, he was still convinced to quit the game, which isn't great. So because of that, I'm here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we are jumping a couple spots now to not someone on Team Victory. And I feel like this person only got as far as it did because the Team Victory kept losing challenges. I feel like there's a decent chance she could have been the first boot had her team gone to elimination. But here we have Izzy. And I feel like I said this now in all three of these player rankings, but I just don't think Izzy really plays the game in any of her seasons, really. She's just sort of there for the ride a lot of the time. She just is off in her own world a lot of the time. And I feel like we got more of the same this time. Mind you, it did benefit her to a certain extent as, again, she wasn't manipulated by Alejandro at any point. She wasn't blinded by him despite being on the same team as him. But at the end of the day, I feel like she was sort of an odd person out. I feel like there's a decent chance she's the first boot if they had gone to an elimination ceremony. I mean, she does have Owen, I guess, but so there could have been a chance she could have survived. But even then, I mean, she doesn't really offer much value to her team at any point. And because of that, I can't have her too high. She's here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12. And these next two are relatively close. I can see an argument for the order of these two. But it is the two remaining Team Victory members. And I decided to go with Lindsay here at number 12. Now, again, I feel like a lot of her fate was determined by being on Team Victory and just losing challenge after challenge, which isn't great. I mean, it definitely caused her to be in a bad spot, and a big reason why she is a pre-merge boot on this season. And I can see the debate for her being the highest ranked Team Victory member, as we'll certainly talk about the next person soon after. However, I ultimately decided to go with Lindsay lower as at the end of the day, she wasn't, again, super active in the gameplay. I felt like a lot of the Team Victory votes were just kind of nothing votes. And she just happened to be one of the last few people standing due to not really doing anything to cost her team the challenge. But still isn't great. I mean, and I could see her getting further if she didn't lose as many challenges as she did, but she did. So because of that, I have her here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11. And as I said, we are on to the last Team Victory member here. And here we have DJ. And I can see some people arguing for DJ to be lower as, again, a lot of his game was defined by the animal curse he got in the premiere, which, real or imagined, was a factor in a lot of people's minds, including DJ's mind, which caused him to not really take the game that seriously. I mean, he is somewhat blamed for a lot of those eliminations and them losing challenge after challenge, and he is in the bottom two quite a bit during that stretch. And it also got to a point where DJ himself felt like the only way to rectify the curse was to quit the game. We literally see him try to throw the tiebreaker challenge in the round that Lindsay goes out, but he's just kept in the game because I guess it would create more drama, I guess. I mean, so again, he did try to quit the game as well, which isn't ideal. However, there are two reasons why I have him above the rest of the Team Victory members. One is that despite the curse, he does outlast all of them. He is the last remaining Team Victory member. And while I can say that's because of the curse and karma or whatever, I mean, he still managed to survive all those votes in which he, again, is whittled down until he's the last remaining member there. But the other reason, and I think the more compelling reason, is that even as the last member of Team Victory, there was potential for him to survive and really find an in for himself in the post-merge. we see Alejandro approach him with a deal that could have led to something if Alejandro is willing to uphold it. And I mean, we'll talk about Alejandro later in this list, but I feel like that could have offered DJ something had he survived until the merge. And I feel like that's, again, gives DJ quite a bit of credit. However, again, Team Victory does lose the challenge and he is automatically eliminated there. So, again, it wasn't meant to be at the end of the day, but I feel like those pros are enough to have him above all the other Team Victory members and the highest ranked person there. But at the end of the day, he is still a pre-merger. He still lost all those challenges and he still tried to quit the game. So I can't reward him too much. So because of that, I have him here at number 11. And with that, we are now moving on to number 10. And obviously the rest of this list is all people who are on Team Amazon or Team Chris. But at number 10, we have someone who, again, is debatable between this person and the next person, but I decided to go with this person despite making it one round further in the game. But here we have Tyler. And Tyler's interesting because, again, a lot of the reason that he got as far as he did is because he was on Team Chris, which won a lot of the pre-merge challenges. And he did technically outlast one person we'll be talking about in a moment. However, the reason I have Tyler this low is because I feel like he was more passive in the game than the next person we'll be talking about, where I don't think Tyler really had really any close allies on Team Chris. I mean, I guess you could say he was a tag along for Owen, but even then, I mean, I feel like there are other people who were closer to Owen in the game, which caused Tyler to be a bit worse positioned moving forward to where I don't know, again, how he could make it that far if Team Chris went to some early elimination ceremony. So I think that's a knock there. I mean, he could probably survive an Izzy vote, but outside of that, I mean, he's sort of an outsider. Plus, a lot of his later game is defined by him being the one to walk in on Gwen and Duncan kissing, like being the holder of information there. And obviously, Alejandro manipulates him into revealing that information, which of course sparks the whole love triangle dilemma. And that's not particularly great. I mean, I don't really see how that really benefits his game at the end of the day, other than paying a target on Duncan's back. But even then, Duncan is able to outplay in the next round by making a deal with Alejandro, and they are able to dispose of Tyler relatively quickly. Not too much there. So again, I feel like Tyler was more passive in the game at the end of the day, and I don't really see how he gets towards the end, even if he got to the merge. I mean, he didn't really have that many close allies at the end of the day, and it's hard to see how he really wins the game. But he did at least make it to the last round before the merge, and he did technically survive some votes. So because of that, I'm here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have another player from Team Chris, and here we have Noah. And again, it's sort of a weird situation for Noah because he was eliminated one round before Tyler. Plus, he never actually survives an elimination ceremony. He's literally taken out at the first opportunity. However, I mean, the reason he is voted out is because Alejandro found out that he was plotting to take him out at some point, which he only was able to find out not because someone told him, but because Alejandro was so bad at the challenge that he got to go back to the plane early and see camera footage of Noah telling Owen about how is suspicious of Alejandro. And that involves a level of variance that Noah, or really anyone, could really account for. So I don't fault Noah too much for being the first boot from his team, minus Izzy, but that's just come whatever. But aside from that, Noah does play relatively well. I mean, he is somewhat well positioned for a lot of the game. He is somewhat close to Owen. Owen is someone who trusted him a lot, and Noah was a bit more active in the game than even Tyler, to where I feel like Noah could have gone a bit farther in the game than Tyler had the situation not happened. So again, the reason I have him above Tyler is, again, I don't fault him as much for his elimination as it required some really weird circumstances, but also him being more well positioned and more active in the game than Tyler. So again, those were the decision makers for me. So because of that, I have Noah here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have another weird player to talk about, and one that made it decently far into the game. But here we have Courtney. And Courtney's interesting because she spends a lot of the game in a pretty decent position, being on Team Amazon, but also kind of having a good relationship with Gwen, largely through their shared interest in Duncan. Aside from an agreement about Heather they ever lost a challenge, there isn't much gain to speak of until Duncan re-enters the game, in which we get to, well, the love triangle. While she garnered a lot of sympathy from people taking her side in the situation, she handles that very poorly. She tries throwing challenges specifically to vote out Gwen, which her teammates pick up on. She also tries flirting with Tyler for whatever reason, and later Alejandro to make Duncan jealous. And by the time Team Amazon goes to elimination, she's burned bridges with Heather and Cody, allowing Gwen to get the numbers to vote her out. But due to Cody conveniently being disoriented due to a concussion he sustained during the challenge, he accidentally votes for Sierra, turning what would have been a 3-2 Courtney boot into a 2-2-1 tie. And she gets saved by the tiebreaker where she has to eat eucalyptus leaves, which Gwen just happens to be allergic to. So really she's saved by a massive plot contrivance there. Beyond that, it's very apparent that her emotions are clouding her judgment, allowing Alejandro to swoop in and completely win her over, and she basically spends the rest of the game as Alejandro's sidekick, which is partially the reason she's voted out with Blanley along with her cheating in the challenge. So, I mean, it's not a great game to assess. Again, I feel like she was in a decent enough position to where even if Team Amazon lost some challenges, she probably would have survived, and she got a lot of goodwill from the love triangle situation where most people seem to be siding with her over Gwen. It's just that she completely does nothing with that goodwill and actively burns people to where she should have been able to get out Gwen very easily at that first elimination ceremony. But with her almost being voted out and being saved by matters outside her control, I think that's pretty bad. And while she does get to 6th and 7th place, I mean, a lot of her end game is her just following Alejandro and just not really seeing that he's manipulating her. So that's not great. But again, she still made it decently far. So because of that, I have her here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7. And we have someone who I mentioned not too long ago, and someone who was also very much involved in the love triangle. But here we have Gwen. And I feel like a lot of Gwen's game is similar to Courtney's. Again, she's in a pretty good position for a lot of the pre-merge. And actually, I think she might have been in a better position, if I'm being honest, as she at least had Cody, who was pretty loyal to her at that point and would have stuck by her no matter what. And again, a lot of it is similar to Courtney until we get to the love triangles situation where obviously Duncan comes back into the game and she kisses him, sort of starts a relationship there. But once that gets found out, I mean, her game pretty much blows up. And it seems like she's on the bad end of things where most people want to get her out. Like Sierra's really mad at her. Courtney's, of course, is really mad at her. And it seems like most people agree that she would be voted out there. However, the thing about Gwen, and the reason I have her above Courtney on this player ranking, is that by the time they actually go to the elimination ceremony, she isn't supposed to be going home. She actually manages to get Cody and Heather back on her side to vote out Courtney. Now, granted, some of that is due to Courtney just being very bad and just handling things very badly and burning bridges. However, I still think it's pretty impressive on Gwen's part that she was able to go from being a consensus target if they go to elimination to essentially having the numbers, and she would have survived that vote if Cody didn't screw up the vote and if the tiebreaker just didn't happen to be something she was designed to lose. So I feel like those things are enough to have her above Courtney. And again, a lot of their games were similar. And obviously, while she ends up in a worse position for seemingly no reason, where obviously Duncan is also in a bad position, but a lot of people just seem to focus on Gwen being in a bad spot. But she's able to recover and she should have survived that elimination ceremony. It's just due to weird plot circumstances that cause her to not survive it. So because of that, I have her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have an interesting player to talk about, and another player who I've been critical of in the past, but I feel like this is arguably his best game, and here we have Owen. And again, I've been critical of Owen in the past. I feel like his island game was very lackluster in my opinion, very passive throughout. His action game was even worse, where obviously he technically gets to the final 3, but didn't really do much to get there, and even then he had to come back into the game. This season, I feel like there is an argument for him being the best here, even though it's not an exceptionally great game either. But again, he's on Team Chris, and while Alejandro doesn't seem that close to him, I mean, he does have Noah and he does have Izzy. I mean, those are two allies right there. I mean, and Izzy doesn't really do much for him, but Noah is a bit more of a number two for him for a lot of the game. And Noah is the one to initially plant the seed that Alejandro is probably more manipulative than he's letting on. And while Owen doesn't immediately pick up on that, I mean, he does over the next couple episodes. But again, a lot of his early game is pretty straightforward. I mean, they don't really go to an elimination ceremony. And when they do go to an elimination ceremony, I mean, he does lose Noah, however, which isn't great, but I already talked about how that was sort of a weird circumstance and again, not particularly ideal for either of them, but whatever. And from that point on, I mean, he's in an interesting spot as well. He also survives the Tyler vote all right. Obviously, Duncan comes back into the game, and Duncan sort of picks up where Noah left off, where he's trying to let Owen know that Alejandro can't be trusted. And we see him like in the last round before the merge. We see Duncan and Alejandro really vie for Owen's trust, sort of placing Owen in the middle of the team to an extent. And I feel like had they gone to an elimination ceremony, he probably would have had a lot of control in who would go home there. But obviously that doesn't end up happening. And then at the merge, I mean, he's just voted out for being a threat, but I think it's also because he had fully picked up on Alejandro being a threat, and Alejandro recognized that and probably just rallied the votes around him. So again, I guess in a lot of ways it's more the same in the sense that he's not super active in the game. However, he did technically be more involved in the game than any of his previous seasons, where a lot of his storyline involves him sort of figuring out about Alejandro along the way. We see Noah at least attempt to get him on board to vote out Alejandro if they go to an elimination ceremony. And of course, we saw him being courted by Duncan and Alejandro before the merge. So those are things I can at least give him some credit for. And obviously the fact that he does make it to the merge is something at least. It's just a matter of he didn't really enact much beyond that. So I can't give him too much credit for that, but it's still an impressive enough game to land him here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have a very interesting player to talk about as well. And again, sort of a weird situation where this person's placement is inflated by outside circumstances, but it is what it is. And here we have Duncan. And of course, Duncan did technically get to 5th place, but he did have a significant absence from the game as well. He obviously joins from the beginning, but quits the game early on because he doesn't want to sing, which is something, I guess. I mean, I understand him not really wanting to play this season, given how he had already won and that he had already done well enough in Island. I get where he's coming from in that he doesn't want to play, but I mean, it explains why he's out of the game for so long. And obviously, he's out for a decent chunk of the pre-merge, coming back in episode 13, where he's then put onto Team Chris. And immediately he gets involved in the love triangle. He kisses Gwen, starts to develop a relationship for her. And once that's found out, he's put in a very bad spot. He actually should have been voted out at that first elimination ceremony. It's just Chris literally admitting that he wants Duncan around for drama that causes him to not be voted out. So it's sort of a weird situation where, again, he should have been voted out right away, but again, it's saved by direct production interference. But then afterwards, again, he's in a bad position initially. However, he does able to build a deal with Alejandro to not target each other. And obviously through that, he's able to survive the next vote, getting out Tyler. And then at the merge, he's, not in the best spot in the world. But, again, he loses Gwen, which kind of takes some heat off of him in the sense that Gwen coming out of the game means he can be more individualistic. And we see that immediately afterward, again, he recognizes that Alejandro is manipulative and a threat to his game, and he tries to get Owen on board to do so. And he's largely successful in doing so. He's able to flip over Owen well, and there's a good chance that had they committed to voting out Alejandro, that they could have actually done so. It's just a matter of at the merge where everyone just decides that Owen's a threat, maybe driven by Alejandro pushing for things that causes him to not get his way there, and he just sort of skates by the next few rounds, not particularly great. And then, he's then taken out shortly thereafter, largely getting outplayed by Alejandro. So it's a bit of a rocky game at the end of the day, and I did debate putting him a bit lower, But considering the competition, I couldn't really justify it. For one, I feel like he was more active in the game than Owen for one. And I feel like, yes, while he is in a bad position at points, I still feel like he survives long enough after getting put into a bad position to have him above Gwen. And with Courtney, Courtney is Courtney. So I feel like this was a decent spot for him. So I feel like that's a big reason I have him this high on the list. But again, it's not a great game either. So I have him here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4. And a part of me wishes I didn't put this person this high. And I'm sure there are people who think that this person is too high on the list. But considering one, the rest of the field, but also some merits we'll get into in a bit, I feel like this is a good spot for them. But at number 4, we have Sierra. And again, I know people will complain about Sierra being this high, even though she makes it to the final 4 and probably should have made it even further, although we'll get into those circumstances in a moment. To me, her biggest flaw is I don't think she wanted to win the game. I mentioned this in a previous video, but I think if she had gone to the end with Cody, she would have given up her game to let him win, believing that would have convinced him to get with her. Now, she never says this on the show, but given her character, I think that's a very real possibility. But if we're looking at what actually happened, it's not great. We know she's incredibly loyal to Cody, but she's so pushy that Cody gets annoyed by her and tries voting her out multiple times. Despite Cody having zero interest in keeping her, she remains loyal to him, which is pretty bad in my opinion. Like Heather, I think she also benefited from Team Amazon winning so many challenges pre-merge, as she definitely could have been a target after Heather. Neither of those things are great, and they really harm my view of Sierra as a player. Even so, I think there are some merits to her game that allow her to land this high in the list. For one, I think she's somewhat effective at social manipulation. We see her play dumb in the New York episode when Heather tries recruiting her for an alliance, when really she knows Heather's game and is just playing along. Now, to be fair, I do question whether it was wise for her to reject this alliance, given those two are one of the few people that not like Alejandro at all. However, given she's a super fan, I can at least see where she's coming from. There's also the Paris episode, of course, where we see her act upset at Cody to get in to be nice to her, when really she was just playing hard to get. And she's one of the few women to never like Alejandro, as I alluded to a moment ago, and kind of sees through his act. Although admittedly, I think some of that stems from his quote-unquote mistreatment of Cody. Sierra has some adaptness for the game, as we see, even if I don't think all of her reads are correct. Another thing going for her is that despite being an option in multiple elimination ceremonies, she votes in the majority more often than not. During the love triangle, she sides with Courtney and votes out Gwen in an effort to get closer to Cody. At the merge, she agrees to Alejandro's plan and voting out Owen, which is kind of questionable as Owen was starting to turn on Alejandro at that point. Plus, that entire vote wasn't really set up for her anyway, as the other options there were herself and Heather, so not ideal there. Next round, she wins immunity, but Cody votes for her anyway, and she votes out Courtney, one of Alejandro's closest allies, so I guess that's a good round for her. Duncan round is wonky, where she votes for Heather for some reason, and the vote is split all over the place, but then at the final 4, she wins immunity, and is fully on board with the plan to vote Alejandro, and that plan would have worked. Except she has to mess it up for herself by blowing up the plane and getting herself ejected. So on the whole, I find Sierra very hard to assess because on one hand, she has some decent moments and she does vote in the majority more often than not. However, I think her biggest issue is her obsession with Cody, both in terms of her willingness to win and how she's viewed others in the game. Because on one hand, I think she's smart enough as a Total Drama superfan to recognize that people like Alejandro and Heather are cutthroat and manipulative, and considering those people are an obstacle to her getting what she wants, that being for her and Cody to get to the end together, I think that's a good read. But on the other hand, I don't think she makes many optimal moves for removing those obstacles. If she did, I felt like she could have seen some value in working with Heather earlier on, or working more to take a shot at Alejandro before the final 4. Even so, I think there's enough merit to her game to have her this high on the list, though given the field, I don't know how much that's saying, but it is enough to land her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and in case you haven't noticed, it is actually the final 3 of the season, and all players who I already talked about in a previous video. And it's weird because I feel like all three of these players have at least one fundamental flaw to their game, which I did talk quite a bit about in each of their respective videos, but we just had to order them now here. But at number three, and I know people are not going to be happy with this, but at number three, we have Heather. And I got so much flack in my winner ranking video for having her at the bottom of that ranking. And I still stand by it. I mean, the main reason she was at the bottom is because she was voted out. She was voted out in the Amazon episode, and she was about to be kicked off the plane until it was revealed by Chris that it was a non-elimination round. And while, she does get benefited by the fact that it was a non-elimination round, I mean, for all intents and purposes, like, she knew she was probably getting voted out. The players voted as if it was an actual round. She was literally about to lose the game there. And that enough for me was enough to put her at the bottom of the ranking. But even outside of that, I feel like her game was very rocky in the early stages of it. I literally feel like that from beginning of the game to the love triangle, she was at the bottom of Team Amazon and would have been voted out at any one of those elimination ceremonies had they lost. It's just through the fortune of Team Amazon winning challenge after challenge after challenge that she's allowed to get to that point in the game, at which Duncan comes back and the whole love triangle situation happens. And that does benefit her position. But even then, that is something that happened outside of her control. I mean, and while she does recognize that this is a good spot for her to be in, how the love triangle has distracted people from her, I mean, it's still an instance that she needed to rely on. And again, considering she was going to be voted out in the Amazon episode, she shouldn't have even gone to that point, but she does. And obviously, she's able to take advantage of it. But even outside that, I mean, she is one of the few people who immediately picks up on Alejandro's game, and she tries multiple times to warn people about Alejandro, telling people that he's up to no good, and people just don't listen to her. And some of that is due to her previous reputation, which obviously is a rollover from her action game. But even then, like, it shows how ineffective she was at convincing people in the season. And she was more or less an underdog for so much of the game. And that's another reason that I had her that low on the winner ranking, even outside the voting out situation. She was at the bottom for so much of the game. And I feel like that was a big issue for her. However, she does step it up in the second half of the game. I mean, once the love triangle situation happens, she does recognize the benefit of that and is able to position herself accordingly. She agrees to vote out Courtney, but again, that doesn't go through at the end of the day. And from there, she's pretty active throughout a lot of the game, trying to undercut Alejandro multiple opportunities. Mind you, she doesn't do that much at convincing people to vote him out. I mean, I feel like the only person she's really able to turn against Alejandro is Sierra. And even then, you could argue that a lot of that was driven by Alejandro's mistreatment of Cody, which in turn made Sierra mad at him already. So that was something at least. And again, she's able to navigate her way to the end of the game, but not before being in the bottom two a couple times along the way. So again, even then, she's not an overly dominant player, but she is a very active player, and that's a big credit that I can at least give her, and a big reason I have her this high on the list. However, I still stand by the issues that I talked about in her game in my winner ranking. She was going to be voted out. She was in the bottom for so much of it. And while she's eventually able to have some success in the game, I mean, a lot of that was driven by outside circumstances. But on this player ranking, where again, the voting out issue isn't as big of a concern, I feel like 3 is a decent spot for her. And considering she does ultimately win the game by manipulating Alejandro and getting the best of him, it's still enough to land her here at number 3. Now moving on to number 3. And again, this is another player who I previously talked about in another video, and one who I think played an all-around good game, but like everyone in this top 3, they have a fundamental flaw. And here we have Cody. And I feel I talked about this before in my final boot ranking. I feel like Cody played a good game for the most part. I mean, again, he was rarely being targeted. He was in the majority for the most part, and there are definitely points where he could have taken control of the game, particularly at the round that Gwen goes home. He had the numbers there to vote out Courtney there. It's just that due to plot contrivance, he was screws up the vote and accidentally votes for Sierra again. And that's not particularly great, but he's able to get towards a lot of the game. And again, he was very well positioned to get to the end of the game for a lot of it. He just gets screwed over by certain circumstances, namely the fact that Sierra gets ejected at the final four. I mean, if it wasn't for that, I mean, there's a good chance it gets to the end. And even with the final three, I mean, the fact that the final three was decided by a tiebreaker rather than Heather getting to vote someone out. I mean, she probably votes out Alejandro there, and again allows Cody to get to the end. So I feel like Cody really got screwed over, and it took a lot of outside circumstances that prevented him from actually getting to the end of the game. I feel like those are plenty of pros for his game. However, the fundamental flaw with his game, and one who I talked about multiple times now, is the fact that he took Sierra for granted. I mean, he had a number one ally who was never flipping on him, was going to take him to the end, and more than likely gives up per game to give him the win. But instead, he just tries to vote her out multiple times. And again, a lot of that is due to Sierra just being very annoying socially. But the fact that Cody wasn't able to just bite his tongue and just roll with it is a pretty big issue on his end. I mean, even if he's successful in getting at Sierra, I mean, it really harms his position. It makes it a lot harder for him to get to the end. And the fact that he tries to vote her out multiple times, even though she has immunity, like the fact that he's just that vengeful against Sierra is pretty bad at the end of the day, and a big reason that I do knock him quite a bit. But I still think it was a solid enough game. I feel like it probably would have been a winning game in most situations. It's just a matter of outside circumstances preventing him from getting to the end of the game. And I think he recognized by the end that Sierra was probably more beneficial to his game, and we see that with him allowing her to help during the final three challenge. So I think that's something at least, but considering the fact that he did try multiple times to vote her out is a pretty big knock. But it's still a good enough game and enough to land him here at number 2. And now at number 1, the player I think played the best game on Total Drama World Tour should be very obvious. I mean, it's Alejandro, and I know I got a ton of flack again in my winner ranking video for having him so low, but similar with Heather, a lot of that was because he was voted out. He was about to be voted out at the final four, and again, it's through outside circumstances that he's able to skate on by through that round. I mean, he shouldn't even be a winner at the end of the day, but it's just through those circumstances that allowed him to get to the end of the game. But again, that's largely assessing him as a winner. But if we're looking at the player ranking and comparing it to all the players from World Tour, I mean, he is by far the number one. I mean, the amount of control he had in the game was very impressive and really something to be respected. Now, mind you, I think there are still plenty of holes in this game outside of being voted out the Final Four, and we'll get into those in a moment. But again, he did dominate the game more or less from beginning to end. I mean, he was able to manipulate multiple people into working for him. He was able to skate on by through the game. I mean, he was rarely in the bottom two before the Final Four, and it took a lot of people a long time to fully recognize that he was such a big threat. I mean, the only person that saw from the very beginning that he was very manipulative was Heather, but even then, given Heather's outside reputation from previous seasons, I mean, no one really listened to Heather, and they just bought everything that Alejandro was selling them. So I think the fact that he was able to win over people that easily and dominate the game in such an impressive fashion is a big reason that he's number one. However, there are still some issues with this game that I wanted to address. I mean, I know I spent a lot of time in my winner ranking talking about the fact that he was voted out. And again, that is a big issue for him in general. The fact that he was eventually caught and the fact that people were eventually willing to turn on him. But even before that, I mean, there are still issues with this game. I mean, I think for one, I mean, the fact that he puts in a lot of work to build allies with the Team Victory members only to immediately throw them away. I mean, he's able to get Bridgette and Lashana on his side with relative ease. And like he could have allowed them to get to the merge, like maybe help them out winning some challenges. And at that point, I mean, he would have had two additional allies, two people that would have remained loyal to them. Now, granted, Lashana is one of the more aware people and may have picked up on it eventually, but still, I mean, that's still someone who is willing to work with him at a point. But instead, he seems to almost facilitate their downfall for whatever reason. I mean, obviously, this happens with Bridgette, where again, he gets her stuck to a pole, costing Team Victory the challenge and making her the direct target at that vote, despite already getting her on his side. So that's not particularly great. And obviously, it immediately backfires into him to where Bridgette recognizes just how evil he is, but granted, outside the game. Similar thing with Lashana. I mean, he puts in all this work to win over Lashana, but then just tosses him out with little effort. I mean, especially after he got Harold to quit the game in order to remove an obstacle to him getting to Lashana. I mean, that's not particularly great either. And then there's also DJ, who is the last remaining Team Victory member and someone who he actively built an alliance with, and someone who, again, could have worked with him moving forward, but instead, he actively sabotages DJ in the Jamaica challenge, causing DJ to beat the boot immediately after. And it's like, you're putting in all this work to build allies, but then just immediately undercut them, which I get why. I mean, he is a villain, and I guess they wanted to show off how evil he is. But from strictly a game standpoint, this is pretty bad. I mean, why put in all that effort to build trust with someone just to backstab him? And not only is it bad in that you're removing allies from the game, but you're increasing the probability that people find out about you. You're making yourself seem very sketchy there. You're making it so that people are more likely to turn on you at some point. It's just a matter of them getting eliminated in such a way that they couldn't reveal their truth that allows him to keep on skating by. So that's not great. I also mentioned earlier with the Noah round how, again, it would have been one thing if he was able to sniff it out on his own that Noah was starting to turn on him. But instead, the reason he finds out that Noah is starting to turn on him is because he was so bad at the London challenge that he was eliminated quickly, sent back to the plane, and was able to watch the tapes and see Noah have that conversation with Owen. I mean, that's another case of convenience where he relied on something that he couldn't reliably get in order to gain information that was able to benefit his game. So that's not particularly great either. And, there's also like his mistreatment of Cody, which caused the air to turn on him, other little stuff along the way. And in general, just his inability to get out Heather. And I guess that ties back into the Team Victory situation where he actively sabotaged Team Victory multiple times despite having potential allies there. I mean, instead of trying to sabotage Team Victory and just backstab people that he built bonds with just for the sake of being evil, why not actually help Team Victory win some challenges, maybe help them along? That way you get Team Amazon to elimination ceremonies, weaken them, and get out Heather along the way. Now, you could say that he was trying to strengthen Team Amazon to make them seem like a bigger threat at the merge, but we never hear direct talk of that. So, I mean, and plus the fact that Heather was onto him and could have reasonably turned on him, and especially with the love triangle, that's another situation as well where he does like a leak the love triangle information. He obviously gets Tyler to tell him about it, and he convinces Tyler to tell everyone about it, which of course blows up Gwen and Courtney's spot. However, in doing so, that obviously betters Heather's game. And with Heather being his biggest opposition to a win, the fact that he was able to cause all this drama just to benefit Heather's position is pretty bad as well. Although, again, I don't fault him too much for that. And then obviously the end game, where obviously he was going to be voted out at Final Four until, Sierra blew out the plane and got herself ejected. And even the Final Three, where I think he's benefited by the final three format. Now, there is still a chance that Heather takes him to the end regardless if it was a regular vote, as Heather did have a crush on him to a degree. However, again, there is still a chance that she could have tried to play optimally there and vote out him to take Cody to the end, who's probably an easier win at the end of the day. But still, I mean, it's not particularly great. So there's definitely holes in Alejandro's game and issues with his game outside of his dominance. And that's a big reason I have him relatively low on the winner ranking, mainly because of the voting out. I mean, because if he wasn't voted out at the Final Four and just had gone to the game, ended the game as normal, he is very high on the winner ranking and probably number one, as I feel like he had more control than even Mike did in All Stars. So I think that's something at least. It's just a matter of him being voted out that caused him to be low on the winner ranking. But on a player ranking where, again, being voted out doesn't matter as much, he is easily number one, and he definitely played one of the more impressive games in Total Drama for me. And because of that, I have him here at number one. And there we go. That will do it for this power ranking. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And again, I'll probably be back soon to do one for Revenge of the Island and the other remaining seasons. I definitely have more Total Drama videos planned, as well as other shows that I watch for this channel. Stay tuned for that. And one other thing I like to plug is if you like this Total Drama content in particular, if you like the way that I talk about a game like Total Drama, please check out my other channel, Survivor Gumball, where I talk all about Survivor and Big Brother and Amazing Race. Basically shows like Total Drama. I talk about people in a similar way that I talk about Total Drama people here, so be sure to check that out. But for now, that is the video. See ya.